Hello. Welcome to United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey. Once again, we're back in Jenny Jump State Park here in Hope, New Jersey. Uh, while I'm just going to wait for any last minute stragglers to come down here who may be parking or looking off the rock because that tends to be a thing. Uh, I want to welcome also our online viewers because we do live stream these on YouTube and Twitch. So if you ever can't join us here in person, you can always check us out there. Or if you just happen to not have anything to do on a Saturday night, feel free to join us and say hi because I enjoy talking to people there. You can also check us out on our website, uacnj.org. That's where you're going to find a list of all our member clubs, information on what we do here, and all of our upcoming and past talks. So you can check out that list to see if there's any more upcoming talks you may or may not want to see. In addition, you can check us out on our socials, our Facebook, our Instagram. We have our Discord channel as well. Do check us out there. It's a great resource to ask questions and see what other events we have coming up and all sorts of other information that we have. With that being said, now comes the safety briefing for the people here. If you need to use the bathroom, that is the porta potty to the back, to my left, your right. We also have a little museum and gift shop area, also same direction, but instead of to the back, it's kind of behind me, outlined in red. I'll be there after the talk so that you can ask questions or purchase anything. We do have cold beverages in there, should you need that. When we go to leave, very important, we use our headlights because we do not like getting run over. I'm sure you agree with this. However, if we have any flashlights when we're moving around or laser pointers, do keep in mind flashlights need to be pointed to the ground. Laser pointers, if we have them, please keep in mind our volunteers might use them, but they must be pointed at the sky so we don't accidentally blind people with bounce back or anything like that. And with that, we're going to get into tonight's talk, which is a map to Earth with Dan Kirby. Dan has a bachelor's degree in physics and a master's in computer science. He's been an amateur astronomer since his childhood and is as part of one of our member clubs, AAA, and has been part of us since 2022. He's spent many a long, lonely night here at Jenny Jump, wandering between stars, because he is one of our astrophotographers. Some of his other hobbies also includes reading, cycling, riding self-balancing personal electric vehicles. And with that, Dan.
All right, yeah, so I'm Dan. Thank you all for coming out here tonight. I'm really glad to see you all. As Kim said, I'm from the New York City Astronomy Club. And so the topic of tonight's talk, the title is A Map to Earth. So we're going to be discussing what it would take for an extraterrestrial civilization to discover the presence of our own. So we're looking for sort of a map through the galaxy. Not this galaxy. This is the Star Wars galaxy. But it looks a lot like ours. Now, obviously this title is a little bit metaphorical, but I promise before you leave tonight, I will show you a map to Earth that extraterrestrials could use to find us. So the Milky Way is a big place. This is our galaxy, one of many like it in the known universe. By our current estimates, it's about 87,000 light years in diameter and has at least 100 billion stars. We believe there are likely more planets than stars in our galaxy, and as many of those planets are as many as 300 million of those planets are estimated to be habitable. Now, there's an asterisk on habitable here because this is based on the SETI Institute's definition of a habitable planet, which they basically define a habitable planet as an Earth-like planet. That is a planet that orbits a middle-age, middle-weight star in its habitable zone. So we're not talking about any sort of like ice moons, like Europa that might have some critters swimming around under the ice. Phil Plait, actually, so he's a famous astronomer, a professional astronomer, who just published an article suggesting that we should expand our notion of habitable planets to include other situations where you could find life. So that's kind of in some way a lower bound. There are 5,197 known exoplanets, which we've discovered mostly since about 1992. We will probably find many, many more. And so that brings us to the question of how many civilizations like our own might be out there whispering at us in the dark. So I want to ask you all a question. Okay, so who here believes in extraterrestrial life? All right. So, uh, keep your hand up if you think there are extraterrestrials within our own galaxy. So, roughly within 100,000 light years. All right. Keep your hand up if you think there are extraterrestrials within 100 light years. You'll see in a little bit why that's a particularly interesting number. Keep your hand up if you think there are extraterrestrials within our own solar system. Keep your hand up if you think there are extraterrestrials. Oh, did not. Yeah. On Earth right now. And keep your hand up if you think there are extraterrestrials in this observatory with us. Yeah. Okay, so how
Lots
can
of
we
hand pointing there.
Yeah. How can we get a handle on this question? How can we get a handle on how many of these civilizations there could be? So you may have heard of the Drake equation. So this was proposed by Frank Drake, who is kind of interesting. Frank Drake sort of this was like a back of a napkin estimate thing that he did. So he was basically he was having like a working group session with other astronomers discussing extraterrestrial life, and he came up with this equation as sort of food for thought. And it's been I think 50 or 60 years since that, and we're still talking about it all the time. So the Drake equation. It takes the rate of star formation in the galaxy, which is a number we pretty much know. If it blows your hair back a little bit that this is a rate, that will make sense at the end. It multiplies it by the fraction of stars that have planets. We're pretty sure this is something like 1. Then it multiplies by the number of those planets that are Earth-like times the fraction that where life appears, the fraction where intelligent life appears, the fraction where that intelligent life develops civilization, and then multiplies that by the lifetime of the average civilization. So the reason why you have a rate on one side and you have a time on the other side is that you want to get like a steady state. Basically, this is sort of like how many at any particular time there are going to be. So we know the first 2 or 3 pretty well, and then as the terms go to the right, they become more and more speculative. And depending on how optimistic your estimates are, you can come out with numbers anywhere between millions of civilizations in our own galaxy and somewhere between 0 and 2. So that is an interesting, sort of food for thought, but it doesn't really lead us to a conclusion. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Fermi paradox. So Enrico Fermi was an Italian-American physicist. If you're interested in more talk about his paradox particularly, I actually did a talk on that, and that's on our website. But so he saw this cartoon in the New Yorker here. I guess at the time, this was in 1950, so I guess at the time there was an issue in New York City where the garbage cans were disappearing, and so the idea was like, oh, maybe the aliens took them and they're going to come back and return them. So basically, the classical statement of the Fermi paradox is, where is everybody? So at this lunch conversation with his colleagues, he pointed out that our universe is significantly older than we are, and at any appreciable fraction of the speed of light, you could cross the entire galaxy within a few million years, which is much shorter than the age of the universe. So basically the question is, why are we not a province of the galactic empire, right? Like, why isn't there, some sort of alien Roman centurions walking down the street, right? And as I like to put it, why don't the aliens just come and land on the White House lawn? So Enrico Fermi is actually a really interesting historical character. Just a brief aside. So Fermi was on the team of physicists. He led the team that discovered the neutron. And being Italian, or he was asked at the same time the neutrino was also discovered, and they were both called neutrons in the original papers covering them because they were both neutral. and some reporter went to Fermi, and they said, hey, Professor Fermi, what's the difference between your neutron and Wolfgang Pauli's neutron that he discovered? And being Italian, Enrico Fermi said, oh, his neutron is a tiny neutron, a neutrino. And that's actually how the neutrino got its name. But yeah, so some related ideas. So as Fermi, originally stated the paradox, it's really about like direct physical contact, right? So um, there's also the notion of the great silence, or the indirect Fermi paradox. Why are we not picking up radio transmission from extraterrestrial civilizations? Um, and why don't they just land on the White House lawn, right? Or if you're my age and you grew up watching the Ancient Aliens channel, why not somewhere else like Red Square? So you may be familiar with this video. This was on the History Channel a bunch. Um, this is some Soviet soldiers guarding a mysterious object that crashed in Siberia. I don't think this is an alien spaceship. I'm pretty sure this is like a piece of an artillery gun that fell out of an airplane or something. But like, I want to believe, but we're not here to sort of speculate about aliens being here. You want to hear about that? You can go to a talk by this guy. And as another brief aside, I just want to point out that I don't think our ancestors really needed help from aliens to build the great wonders of the ancient world. But I do love this. So this is a screenshot from the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode on ancient aliens. I just find it really hilarious that they imagine this notion of these aliens coming to Earth to help us build the pyramids, and what technology the aliens going to bring. Well, they're going to have some sort of like hover sled. Like, they didn't think to bring like a packet truck or like a backhoe or something. They were just like, oh, just do the same thing, but now you can do it with 3 guys instead of with a whole team, right? Okay, so we're not talking about that. So what would it look like to make first contact with extraterrestrials? So I was going to show you guys a video, but our internet here is not that great. So I've got a series of GIFs. So this is spoilers for the 1996 movie Star Trek First Contact. Basically what happens in this movie is this guy over here, Zephram Cochrane, he takes this spaceship out into the solar system. He discovers warp travel, so he can travel at the speed of light. And this Vulcan vessel that happens to be passing through notices this, and they come down to Earth, and they do the whole live long and prosper, right? So maybe it would look like that. Maybe it would look like this movie. Anybody seen this movie? The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. The scientists come to Earth, and they say, or the aliens come to Earth, and they say, we don't really care what you do with your own planet, but we've noticed that you've developed nuclear weapons, and if you export your violence into space, then we're gonna have a problem. We're gonna come down and tell you to stop. Or maybe this movie, Plan 9 from Outer Space. This is largely considered to be the best bad movie of all time. So it's basically the same plot. The aliens show up, and they're trying to prevent us from building a solaronite bomb. And they explain that if you take a can of your gasoline and you conceptualize the sun as a big burning ball of gasoline, and you spread that gasoline to the Earth, if you ignite the solaronite bomb, it'll ignite the sun and the light itself and destroy the entire universe, right? Or maybe one of these other movies, right? Like 2001: A Space Odyssey. In that movie we discovered this alien artifact on the moon. That's sort of like, oh, the aliens have noticed that we've developed space travel, so that's the interesting thing that they're going to come down and talk to us about, right? And even in the Avengers, so this is a blink and you missed it scene in the original Marvel Avengers movie, but there's a bit where Thor says that the humans experimenting with alien technology with the Tesseract is a signal to the cosmos that Earth is ready for another class of warfare. So basically, there's a theme that we're seeing here where we know we have this idea that humans are going to develop some sort of technology that aliens are going to notice, and then they're going to come here and want to make contact with us. So I don't think it's going to look exactly like this. I would sort of summarize it with this quote from Carl Sagan. This is as if all the anthropologists in the world were to converge on one of the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean because they just invented the fishing net. So, okay, is there some technology that maybe Dr. Sagan thinks might be something that would provoke contact with aliens. So I sort of seeded the pot here by showing the poster of his movie Contact, with the big radio dish on it. So he believed that, if there was a technology that would lead ETs to us, it would be our radio emissions. We've been leaking radio waves into space for about 100 years. Um, and radio waves travel at the speed of light. So anyone within about 50 light years would be watching Carl Sagan on the news right now. And if you were, say, 50 light years away and you picked up the first signals that we sent out, you'd be able to send your reply. So who's listening? Who's out there who could be listening to us? So this is a map of known stars within 50 light years. As you can see, that's kind of crowded. We are actually not sure exactly how many stars there are in our radio bubble, but based on estimates of the local stellar density, we think it's probably something around 13,000, which sounds like an awful lot, but most of those stars are going to be red dwarf stars, and the potential for life around red dwarf stars is quite controversial. Brief aside about that. So red dwarf stars are low mass, and they live a lot longer than stars like our sun. So that ostensibly would make them interesting candidates for life, because they have a lot longer, for it to develop and for that civilization to get out of the dark ages, if you will, right? But there are other astronomers who think that red dwarf stars are less likely candidates for life, because in order to be in that habitable zone that we talked about, the planet would need to be much closer to the star. And that would mean potential exposure to radiation from solar storms and whatnot. So I'll sort of leave it at that in terms of the red dwarf issue. And maybe about 100 of those stars will have planets in the habitable zone, in that radio bubble. And all right, so wait a minute, they can hear everything. If anybody stopped the drive-through on the way up here, you think that the aliens are listening to what you ordered from Taco Bell tonight? Probably not. So if you've ever played with a pair of walkie-talkies, you've experienced how radio signals can decay at sort of an alarming rate. You basically have this inverse square law, as illustrated here, where you're twice as far away. It's 4 times as weak of a signal. So how far away can we really be heard? Well, that's a complicated question, because we don't necessarily know what kind of hardware an extraterrestrial civilization would be bringing to bear, to look for us. And we also don't know what kind of software they might have. It's possible that, even with conventional antennas like we have today, that with appropriate software tools, you could pick out signal from noise a lot better than we can, right? When completed, the Square Kilometer Array, which is a currently under construction radio telescope array that is split between 2 countries, so half of it is in South Africa, the other half is in Australia, would potentially be able to detect radio signals similar to Earth's television signals from as far away as about 100 light years. However, so the Square Kilometer Array is not designed to do that. We're really building it to look at other things. And realistically speaking, such a telescope could detect our radio bubble, but probably would not be able to decode the episodes of, I don't know, I Love Lucy and Gilligan's Island that are out at that distance. So basically what this means is that direct radio communication between galactic civilizations is going to require a lot of energy. It's going to be a project in its own right. Okay, so what about other methods potentially that extraterrestrials could use to detect life on Earth? So on December 8th, 1990, the Galileo spacecraft made a flyby of Earth as part of its gravity assist to get to Jupiter. NASA used this as an opportunity to calibrate Galileo's instruments and they were able to successfully detect signs of life on Earth. There's a whole joke about this being the first flyby of Earth. Since 1992, exoplanet astronomy has really exploded, and there are many methods of detecting exoplanets, but one that is of particular interest is the transit method. So basically the transit method is when ever you have the exoplanet, that is the planet that's orbiting another star, pass in front of its host star. So we see like a little dimming of the star's light. And the thing that makes that interesting is that, when the starlight from that exo planet, when the starlight passes through the atmosphere of the exoplanet, we can detect a chemical spectrum of the elements in the atmosphere, and we can potentially use that to identify interesting things, in that might be in that planet's atmosphere. The James Webb could potentially detect signs of life on an exoplanet, but it would probably take its entire operational lifetime looking at just one planet, which is not what we built the James Webb to do. All right, so who is looking at us? So these two scientists, Lisa Kaltenegger and Jackie Faherty, published a paper in 2021 estimating how many nearby exoplanets may be able to see Earth transit the sun. They found 1,700 such stars within 300 light years and 319 additional ones that will be able to see the Earth transit the sun within the next 5,000 years. In total, there are 46 stars that are both able to see Earth transit and are in the radio bubble, and none of them is currently known to have an exoplanet. So an interesting thing here is that, like, you could conceptualize a situation where there are two civilizations that are both sort of mutually transiting their host stars, and then they would be able to sort of communicate with each other, like using a giant laser, right? Like you could have like kind of a Morse code thing. Like obviously aliens aren't going to know Morse code, but we could teach it to them, and like we could, send a signal just by like flashing a big laser to change how much the Earth is dimming the sun. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about, what it is that we're actually interested in detecting here, and draw the distinction between technosignatures and biosignatures. So technosignatures are signs of civilization. They're signs that that someone is, altering the what's going on the planet. That some technosignatures humans have created, nitrous oxide, NO2, chlorofluorocarbons, other pollutants, CO2 emissions, climate change, and light pollution. So the dominant contributor to light pollution is the high pressure sodium and low pressure sodium street lamps. And so sodium emits light at a particular emission spectrum, so it's possible that an extraterrestrial civilization could see that our planet looks kind of sodium-y at night. And by the way, if you're interested in light pollution, come back on August 26th for Mark Zdarsky's talk on that topic. A few biosignatures. So biosignatures would be some signs of life. Oxygen is a very interesting one. So oxygen is a volatile chemical. It usually reacts with other things. We get carbon dioxide. We get other oxides, nitrous oxide, silicon dioxide, quartz. So the fact that there's oxygen in Earth's atmosphere is a sign that something funny is going on. That if all the trees disappeared, right, all the things that turn CO2 back into free oxygen, eventually there'd be no oxygen in our atmosphere. Other volatiles like methane, phosphine, seasonal variations in atmospheric gases that's driven by life processes. And then obviously the most famous and interesting technosignature would be a Dyson sphere. So it's basically this idea that as your energy consumption increases, eventually you want to capture all the energy output of your star, and you're just going to sort of box that thing up, Ziploc for freshness. And so far we haven't noticed any stars winking out due to Dyson spheres, but maybe sometime soon. It's also possible that an extraterrestrial civilization could detect our magnetosphere. So life on Earth is possible because we have an active core, iron core, that is creating a magnetic field which protects us from cosmic rays and the rays of the sun. This is why compasses allow us to discover which direction is north. If you go to Mars and try to use a compass, it won't tell you which way is north. Though by convention, we consider north to be the same, like if you curl your fingers in the direction that the planet is spinning, your thumb is on the North Pole. That happens to be the way it is on Earth. So we can define north for any planet or any moon, or any body, but not all of them have magnetic fields. So in 2021, astronomers used the Hubble to confirm the presence of a magnetosphere on a Neptune-sized exoplanet about 123 light years away. And the Webb telescope will likely be able to detect magnetospheres with some more precision than that. So magnetosphere is not a direct confirmation of life, but it's an interesting indicator because, as we see on Earth, magnetosphere was a prerequisite for life. So it is something that kind of gives you a bunch at once, because it's actually easier in the case of the Hubble detection. They actually didn't detect the planet; they detected the magnetosphere. So like we knew the planet was there because we saw a magnetosphere. So you get kind of a 2-for-1 with this kind of detection. So those are the ways that an extraterrestrial civilization could potentially detect us, um, and a relative idea of sort of where they have to be technologically compared to us. Maybe similar to where we're at now, getting to be ahead of us. But what about if we wanted to sort of send a message in a bottle? Like suppose we wanted to actually say hello to the extraterrestrials. We wanted to send out that map. Um, so this is our map to Earth. This is the Pioneer plaque. So the Pioneer space probes, so in the early 1970s, in 1972, they were launched to explore Jupiter and Saturn. And sort of a last-minute addition, Carl Sagan and Frank Drake convinced NASA to include these plaques. They have a map showing the location of nearby pulsars, and I'll get into how you read the map in a later slide. But it also has a diagram of the space probe itself, 2 scale models of human beings, and also a map of our solar system. You will notice Pluto is still in it. So how does this map work? So basically, the idea is to use pulsars as sort of like a lighthouse. So a pulsar is a highly magnetized rotating neutron star, and it produces these sort of twin beams of electromagnetic radiation. By the way, does anyone here recognize this lighthouse? Young man? But where is it? It's not on Sandy Hook, but it overlooks Sandy Hook. This is actually where I'm from. I'm from that part of New Jersey. But yeah, so basically you can use these as kind of like lighthouses because they have a particular rate of spin and thus a period of these 2 beams and a location. So here's how you read the map. All right. So the bottom line here is a distance baseline. So this is supposed to represent the distance to the galactic core. Each of the 14 pulsars is represented sort of by like these spokes that go around. So each of these, the length of these lines is based on the distance baseline. And then in order to identify them, we have this hydrogen atom diagram. So the idea here is that we are expressing the period of the pulsar in multiples of the time of the hydrogen hyperfine transition, which is a common transition observed in nature. So we assume that an extraterrestrial or that a civilization would know that period of time, and these are represented as these binary numbers that are kind of these cool little very diesel squiggles next to the lines to each of the pulsars. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Dan, hold on a second. The galaxy is 3-dimensional, and that's a 2-dimensional map. Yeah, so they thought of that as well. There's a little tick mark on each of the lines to the pulsars that represents how far, in terms of the distance baseline, that pulsar is above the plane of the galaxy. All of these pulsars are above the plane of the galaxy, and that's because we are above the plane of the galaxy right now in our orbit. And another feature of this is actually because pulsars decay and they move around in space. One of the assumptions we sort of make here is that the extraterrestrials that find this map would have to be able to sort of run the clock back and try to figure out, like if they found maybe 3 or 4 of the pulsars and they could figure out basically where they were at the time that the probe left Earth, which they can do because there's a carbon-14 sample they can date on the probes, they know how old it is, then they could figure out our location. Remember, they basically only need to find like 3 of them, and we gave them 14. So this is a pretty accurate, pretty useful map. So that was the first ones to get launched. Now I'm going to talk about the Arecibo message, which is another attempt at communicating with extraterrestrials. So this was launched this was another Carl Sagan project. So this was sent out in 1974 as sort of a publicity stunt for the Arecibo Observatory. So the Arecibo Observatory was a radio telescope that operated in Puerto Rico from 1963 to 2020, RIP. It beamed this message toward the globular cluster M13, which you might be able to see tonight through one of our telescopes, if the clouds let you. So M13 is a really beautiful, really bright globular cluster, and it's about 30,000 light years away. So this message is going to be taking some time to get to its destination. And we don't really expect that we're going to see a civilization inside a globular cluster, because globular clusters are very dense. There's a very dense collection of stars, so you're having a lot of like close encounters, things that would sort of pull planets out of orbit. But it was kind of an interesting stunt, and it is cool that like this message will get there and be receivable. The Arecibo Observatory basically could be used for directed like galactic communication if there was somebody out there to talk to. It was designed by Frank Drake and Carl Sagan, those two guys again, and I'm going to explain what the actual message is, because it looks kind of wacky, right? So it's exactly 1,679 binary characters, and that was chosen because that's the product of two prime numbers, 73 and 23. So there's only two ways to reconstruct the message in two dimensions. You either do 73 by 23 or 23 by 73, and the other one is obviously gibberish. The top row, those white blocks, those are the numbers 1 to 10 in binary. Then the purple blocks are the atomic numbers of the elements that make up our DNA. The green blocks are the formula for the DNA nucleotides. And then we have this thing in the middle, which is a drawing of a DNA double helix. And then down the middle there, that white sort of spine in the middle, is the number of DNA nucleotides. And then the next level, where you have this little red sort of stick figure guy, that is supposed to represent a human being, because of course we all look like this. And to our right is the number of living human beings at the time the message was sent, and to our left, that's supposed to represent the height of the average man. Sorry, ladies. And then at the bottom, the yellow blocks, maybe that's a little more obvious what that is. The yellow blocks are a representation of our solar system. Notice Pluto is still in it. And then the purple stuff is a drawing of the radio telescope itself. So I think this is pretty cool, but I don't know. I don't know if I would have been able to figure out what that meant. So now I'm going to talk about the Voyager records. So this is kind of a repeat of what we did with the Pioneer plaques, but they had a lot more time to really build out, a very rich and robust representation of life on Earth. So the Voyagers, they explored Jupiter, Saturn, and Saturn's moon Titan. That was Voyager 1. And Voyager 2 explored Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So there was a guy at NASA who basically noticed that there was this alignment of the outer planets that would allow us to explore them all, in this one go. And thankfully, we're able to get them out there in time to hit this grand tour. There was actually a third potential Voyager mission, which would have done Jupiter, Saturn, and then Pluto. That was the one they passed on. And obviously now we have New Horizons, so we have visited Pluto, but it would have been really interesting to go back then, right? So I thought I would play you some of the audio that went along with the Voyager records. So in addition to the maps, they carry a lot of Earth culture. They are, along with Pioneers and New Horizons, they will likely be the last human artifacts to exist in the galaxy. They sent 116 images encoded as audio, spoken greetings in 50 Earth languages, other sounds from Earth, and 90 minutes of music, including Chuck Berry's song Johnny Be Good. Bill Nye was he was at Cornell when they were working on this, and he remembers them making a joke that, the aliens are going to land and they're going to send a message back saying, send more Chuck Berry. But yeah, so Carl Sagan insisted that the records contain no information about war, oppression, violence, perhaps feeling that the aliens might interpret that as hostility. And actually, I'm not going to read that one, because if you didn't already read it now, is your chance to find it out firsthand.
您好，
Ooh.
有影嘅嚟揾姐姐啊！
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان.
Shalom.
Բոլոր անոնց, որ գտնվին եզերքի միքամազություններեն անտին, ողջույններ։
Namaskar. Vishe Shanti Hok.
買啦，ခင်ဗျာ
各位好嘛，祝各位平安健康快樂。
Milí přátelé, přejeme vám vše nejlepší.
Hartelijke groeten aan iedereen.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Herzliche Grüße an alle.
Oitinis poteste chairete. Eirenikos prosphilus elelithamen philoi.
પૃથ્વી ઉપર વસનાર એક માનવ તરફથી બ્રહ્માંડના અન્ય અવકાશમાં વસનારાઓને હાર્દિક અભિનંદન.
I like that this guy asked them to
આ
write
સંદેશો
back.
મળે વળતો સંદેશો મોકલાવશો.
Shalom.
धरती के वासियों की ओर से नमस्कार.
Ashuli.
Üdvözletet küldünk magyar nyelven minden békét szerető lénynek a világegyetemen.
Selamat malam hadirin sekalian. Selamat berpisah dan sampai bertemu lagi di lain waktu.
Tanti auguri e saluti.
Konnichiwa. O genki desu ka?
ನಮಸ್ತೆ ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಶುಭಾಶಯಗಳು.
Kay pachamatna pitapas maitapas rimapayast runasimit.
안녕하세요.
Salvete quicumque estis.
We got Latin
Bonam
in.
erga vos voluntatem habemus, et pacem per astra ferimus.
Muslayo muchabantu bensieno. Mukama bawe mirembe bulijo.
各位都好吧，我们都很想念你们，有空请到这儿来玩。
नमस्कार. या पृथ्वीतील लोक तुम्हाला त्यांचे शुभविचार पाठवतात आणि त्यांची इच्छा आहे की तुम्ही या जन्मी
That's my wife's language.
पृथ्वीवासीहरूबाट शान्तिमय भविष्यको शुभकामना.
Siyanibingelela maqhawe sinifisela inkonzo ende.
Mwibwanji mbantu wonse bakumwamba. ସୂର୍ଯ୍ୟ ତାରକାର ତୃତୀୟ ଗ୍ରହ ପୃଥିବୀରୁ ବିଶ୍ୱ ବ୍ରହ୍ମାଣ୍ଡର ଅଧିବାସୀମାନଙ୍କୁ ଅଭିନନ୍ଦନ.
درود بر ساکنین ماورای آسمان ها. بنی آدم اعضای یک پیکرند که در آفرینش ز یک گوهرند. چو عضوی به درد آورد روزگار، دگر عضوها را نماند قرار.
Witajcie, istoty z zaświatu.
Paz e felicidade a todos.
Odigiano.
सब लोगों ने मारो राम राम पहुंचे. हमें अठे राजी खुशी हाँ. तुम्हें उठे राजी खुशी रह जाओ.
Salutări la toată lumea. Здравствуйте, приветствую вас.
Želimo vam sve najlepše sa naše planete.
Aibuan. Riadu Melisa Marena. Hola y saludos a todos.
Silema Hemen.
Hälsningar från en dataprogrammerare i den lilla universitetsstaden Esaka på planeten jorden.
నమస్తే. తెలుగు మాట్లాడే జనముల నుంచి మా శుభాకాంక్షలు.
สวัสดีค่ะสหายนายธรณีพลพวกเราในธรณีนี้ขอส่งมิตรจิตมาถึงท่านทุกคน
Sayın Türkçe bilen arkadaşlarımız, sabah şeriflerinize hayırlı olsun.
Пересилаємо привіт із нашого світу. Бажаємо щастя, здоров'я і многое літа.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। हम ज़मीन के रहने वालों की तरफ से आपको खुश आमदीद कहते हैं.
Chân thành gửi tới các bạn lời chào thân hữu.
Yechidai hui an aur aganoizoid.
So,
Adanish
yeah, a few things I want to highlight about this, about the messages. You notice that a lot of the people who they spoke to, you know, the message they sent sort of anticipated a response. You know, you see a lot of people saying looking forward to hearing from you, which I think reflects a deep sort of hopefulness that we all have, that there are, other intelligent beings out there for us to talk to. Or maybe, they were confused and they thought that we actually had met some aliens and we were recording a message for them directly. But yeah, the other thing that I think is very amusing, as you notice from the Swedish speaker, is that they kind of had trouble finding people to record messages for this. So they just went around campus at Cornell looking for foreign students, like, hey, you want to send a message to the aliens? And the Swedish speaker is just the one who, happens to say, oh, yeah, from the town of Ithaca. And another thing I think is really interesting is that we're really giving, whoever finds this record, assuming anybody ever does, a lot of tools to understand us, just in that audio, right? Like you saw, there was a lot of South Asian languages where you can hear the similarities. You can hear Namaste in multiple languages. You can hear, other words that are loan words. So we're kind of giving them like almost a roadmap to understand our history and, our linguistic diversity here on Earth. Let's try to play it again. No. Okay, so I thought it would be fun to include some images from the Voyager probes that were encoded as audio for the prying eyes of the extraterrestrials. So over here on the left, this is the calibration image. You may have noticed on the outside of the record there was a copy of this image, and also a circle being the simplest geometric shape. It's kind of obvious that if whatever your decoding mechanism that you've devised is, you come out with like some oblong shape here that you probably got a bug in your software. I'm pretty sure that this image is supposed to represent the way we consume food, though I don't know anybody who does that. These are some streetscapes. So the top left here, this is in Pakistan. On the bottom right, that's Ethiopia. And of course, I think most people recognize this is the UN building in New York City. This is Thailand on the left, and on the right, this is a picture of Heron Island in Australia. And they even threw in a picture of Arecibo, so even the telescope made it in. These are some images that are intended to show the aliens, about our space technology and how we were able to send the probes out. So in the top left, you have an astronaut in space. In the bottom left here, you have a textbook on physics. And on the right, this is actually this is the same type of rocket as the one that launched the Voyagers. Obviously, this is not the rocket that launched them, because that would have been impossible back then. And the Voyagers are the first human spacecraft to make it into interstellar space. So currently, they're about between 120 and 140 astronomical units from the sun. So the astronomical unit is the distance between the Earth and the sun. That puts them at, I think, 0.002 light years from us. And depending on your definition, this is actually kind of controversial, but they are in interstellar space. They outpace the Pioneers, and the Pioneers also we've lost contact with. But we are still in contact with the Voyagers, and we believe that they will stay operating maybe to the end of the decade, at least until like 2025. And this is the last picture that was taken by Voyager 1's camera. So this is, you may have heard of this famous image of the pale blue dot. So that's Earth there. That is the planet you live on. Everyone you've ever known, every tyrant, every first kiss, every last word, every episode of Breaking Bad, all happened on that little mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam, as Mr. Sagan called it. The actual conception of this picture was that they wanted to take a family photo. So the idea was that they were going to point the camera at the solar system and photograph all of the planets. And Carl Sagan actually had like a big sort of push and pull with NASA about this idea, because they didn't want to do this, because pointing the camera at the sun basically burn out the optics of the camera. There's something burning out in the back there too. Hope Chris is okay. So anyway, they finally agreed to do it, because I guess they were afraid, there was nothing out there to take pictures of, but they didn't want to lose that camera, and they sort of figured, well, what if we find something to take a picture of with Voyager 2, and we want to use Voyager 1 to calibrate the camera? But they did it, and, it sort of became a piece of history. So the Voyagers have another close encounter in their future, and as I said, 0.002 light years from Earth. And in 40,000 years, Voyager 1 will pass within 1.6 light years of a local red dwarf star called Gliese 445. And around the same time, Voyager 2 will pass within 1.7 light years of a similar red dwarf, Ross 248. You can see them on the map here. So Gliese 445 is up here by Polaris, and Ross 248 is over in the constellation Andromeda. So we there now. You might be thinking, you might be looking at this thing. Wait a minute, Dan, isn't like the nearest star way farther away than this? Like Alpha Centauri is 4 light years away. Yeah, actually, the reason why the Voyagers are going to get close to these 2 stars has more to do with the motion of the stars than the motion of the Voyagers. But we still have some gas in the tank for these 2 space probes. So I think you should call your congressperson and tell them to redirect the Voyagers to get a little bit closer to these 2 stars. Now, obviously, their batteries will be dead, and there's no particular reason to think that there would be life around these stars that might find the Voyagers. But I want to believe. So I'm going to talk a little bit about New Horizons. So New Horizons, as you probably know, was launched in 2006 and flew by Jupiter that year in its trajectory out to Pluto. It visited Pluto in 2015, and it visited Arrokoth in 2019. So Arrokoth is this lumpy, weird thing at the bottom right. So we actually discovered Arrokoth after New Horizons launched. And we realized, oh, hey, we can go check out that other, object in the outer solar system. This is the most distant object we've ever visited with a spacecraft. Unlike the Pioneers and the Voyagers, New Horizons does not carry a message or any map that could be used to find Earth. There are a few cultural artifacts on board. There's an American flag, some pieces of other spacecraft, some quarters and postage stamps. Yeah, don't ask me why. But most notably, there is 1 ounce of the ashes of Clyde Tombaugh, who was the astronomer who discovered Pluto. So this was kind of a joke to a certain degree. They asked him when he was getting up there in years, where do you want to be buried? And he said, oh, I want to be buried on Pluto. And we sort of made it come true. So there isn't really much to find, if the extraterrestrials find New Horizons, though I guess they might be able to get a little bit of Clyde Tombaugh's DNA and clone him and make him the loneliest human in history. There was a movement to upload a message to its internal computer memory, but it was called One Earth message, but the project didn't pan out. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the breakthrough initiatives. So these are a set of moonshot projects that were founded by Israeli billionaire Yuri Milner and Mark Zuckerberg. So Breakthrough Starshot is a project to build a light sail spacecraft that would go much faster than the Voyagers and the Pioneers. It would accelerate to 0.2 c, so 20% the speed of light, and be pushed by some kind of laser beam from Earth. And it could be sort of like a fleet of these things. So you might have like kind of a line of them going, one by one, doing this like flyby. So it would take them, 80 years or 20 years to get out there, and then they would send back their message, and they would take 4 years for whatever data they discover to come back to Earth. Breakthrough Listen is a large-scale sky survey study program that was introduced by Stephen Hawking on behalf of the 2 billionaires. And Breakthrough Message is this sort of unspecified project to study the ethics of sending messages to deep space. So this, raises the question. We talked a lot about how extraterrestrials could find us and different, mechanisms they could use to discover our civilization, but that raises the question of whether we actually want to make contact. Many people feel that we shouldn't try to make contact because extraterrestrials might be hostile, and Will Smith might be too busy to save us again. But unfortunately, that is not really possible. As we've covered, Earth's biosignatures and technosignatures have been readily visible for some time. I tend to think that the notion of an alien invasion is based on assumptions that are arguably questionable. Like if the alien invaders are coming for our resources, why not just mine the asteroid belt or their own asteroid belt, right? And if they want to eat us, why not just clone us and make some, do sort of synthetic meats, right? And you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. What if discovering extraterrestrials causes a panic? What if people riot in the streets and all the world's religions are set into crisis? Well, actually, it turns out that most people already believe there are extraterrestrials, and very few of them see UFOs as a threat. So it seems that most Americans already want to believe. So I'm going to leave you on. I'm going to leave this on a hopeful note, but I wanted to include this cartoon, which is also in the New Yorker, where these aliens sort of bring us full circle back to Frank Drake or to Enrico Fermi. these aliens show up and this guy says, FYI, if you're here to plunder Earth's natural resources, you better hurry. But no, so I want to leave this on a hopeful note, and just to remind everyone that, we're not alone here on Earth. There's plenty of other life forms, including in this very forest. There's critters wandering around. Some of them are friendly, some of them are not. And, I really want to make a call sort of for conservation, because the way I see it, there's a famous quote from Arthur C. Clarke where he says that there are two possibilities that exist. Either we're alone in the universe or we're not. And both of those are equally terrifying. And I think the reason why he felt that those are equally terrifying is that if you conceptualize the notion that we're alone, then that means, we're all there is. We're like the flag bearers, standard bearers that are, bringing consciousness to the universe. And if we're not alone, then if we destroy ourselves, then we never get to meet the aliens. So I think it behooves us to preserve our civilization and preserve life on Earth, to maximize the chances that either we meet the aliens or we become the aliens. But yes, that's my talk.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, that gets distracting when it screams at me. For those of you who we will be having a question and answer session. I have a number of questions on my handy dandy handheld internet. But for those of you who snuck in, safety briefing. If you need to use the restroom, it is the porta potty to the back, to my left, to your right. We will have a little museum and gift shop area where you can also get some cold drinks, check out our media display and whatnot. Normally, each one of those buildings that has a roll-off roof, we would have open if the skies were allowing us to view anything besides clouds, but it's not haze from smoke anymore today, so that's looking up at least. So, for our question and answer session, for the people here, you're going to raise your hand and wave it about and kind of keep it raised until I get to you with the microphone so you can speak your question so our online audience can also hear. But I'm going to start this off with the first question from online. And that is, are you on team humans enter the intergalactic civilization and we get demolished, or humans enter that same civilization and we are space orcs from a death world?
I'm not sure I understand the distinction. I feel like...
So there's like a couple people that, oh, wow, we're so fragile and, completely breakable and doomed, and then the other is like, we're like the big nasty trolls under the bridge that you can't stop.
Yeah, like I remember I had a friend in college who mentioned this to me, because like, in Star Trek every alien species has like a little thing, like the Klingons are the warriors and like the Ferengi are the capitalists. Like if you think about it, we're a warrior race, right? Because we have so many wars on Earth and stuff. I think that there's boundlessness in the human spirit. I think that we have within us the capability for great compassion and kindness, and also the capability for cruelty and violence. And so I think that we can go either way. It depends who's like who's leading us and where they're taking us. But I'm on Team Star Trek. I want us to be the Federation exploring space. The new episode of Strange New Worlds was absolutely great. By the way, everybody go get Paramount Plus so you can watch Strange New Worlds.
So basically we come in peace, but we also carry a big stick just in case.
Yeah, that's kind of how things go here on Earth, right?
All right. Was there a question from out here? Crickets. Oh.
I knocked him dead.
Yeah, looking at your shirt, what do you think happened at Roswell?
Oh, that's so tough. So like I've I could go on for a while about that. And one thing I always say with, like Area 51, right, is that the official story about Area 51 is that they, use that as a base to test experimental aircraft. And we know that those aircraft exist because we've seen them in combat, like the F-117 Nighthawk, the U-2, all those other spy planes. So it seems to me that like when I look at Area 51, I think Occam's razor says they probably didn't have a bunch of flying saucers parked next to the U-2s. They probably weren't doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We fly the Roswell flying saucer, and then Tuesday, Thursday we fly the real planes. Maybe I'm wrong. It's sort of the thing that I can't really falsify, right? Because it's like it's illegal for me to go to Area 51 and check for myself. But I think that so there's a person, I think his name is Nick Pope, who was in the UK Ministry of Defense, and they describe him on the news as being the Fox Mulder of the UK. And his whole thing was that he was a civilian employee of the Ministry of Defense through the 1980s and 90s, and he's talked about this on like podcasts and stuff. His job, he had two responsibilities. One of them was to read spy novels and other like memoirs written by people who had classified information, to just check to see that they weren't leaking that information. You see this when books come out by former U.S. Navy SEALs and stuff, right? And the other one was to investigate UFOs. And like they would get UFO reports to the Ministry of Defense. A good chunk of those reports would be classified because they didn't want to share. Like at least he said, most of what's classified in those reports is people's names and addresses. And he was on a podcast that I listened to, and he said, I don't think that anywhere on Earth somebody's got a UFO up on blocks in a warehouse someplace. Now, I mean, I feel like he sort of monetized his resume as having been working on this. Now he goes to all these UFO conferences and things, but even he sort of thinks it doesn't seem like there's a bunch of secret technology that was recovered from someplace like Roswell. But I feel like it's sort of unfalsifiable. I will note about Roswell particularly, a lot of the information that we think of as the canonical Roswell story doesn't really show up until the 1990s. And there's this theory that basically like the people who published those books that were sort of like misremembering stuff. Like there's a story in one of the like early Roswell books that talks about how they had aliens walking around the base. Maybe you think this sounds like a lame cover story like Swamp Gas or something, but what the theory is that basically there was like a guy who had like a head inflammation thing. Like he had he hit his head, and he had his head was all swollen up, and he was walking wounded. He was okay to like do his job, and he was just walking around with his huge head. And so this made it in from some misremembered, kind of later in life memories from this guy who worked on the base, that this was an alien being like walking around. Or like there was like all that stuff about I don't want to get into this because it kind of gets a little bit on the gruesome side.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Sorry.
No, that's me, because I need to remember not directly in front of that speaker. I was about to say, sounds like you need to do another talk.
Well, no, I just
But come in with slightly longer hair and have it frizzed up.
Aliens.
But regardless, even if that was true and we had aliens come down, I think by now, if we had anything, it would have been moved to a different base, and now they just use Area 51 as, well, we got to do something to keep their attention here to protect the secret stuff over there now.
So there's like on the ground at Area 51, there's like this big robot. It's like this like a bunch of like scrap metal that I think the workers there like organized into sort of a sculpture for satellites to photograph, because like they know that the Russian and Chinese spy satellites and now like Google Earth are photographing Area 51, and they like periodically move the thing and like move the arms around and stuff. So like there's some. I think that Area 51 is very interesting, but I don't think that the most likely thing is that there's aliens there. But I could be wrong,
Right. So the next online question is, isn't it easier for us to detect signs of our own life because we know what we're looking for, whereas looking for other life or other life looking for us would be much harder because we don't know what we need to look for?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that there's I think that I think a sense of this may have been reacting in part to my slide about the Galileo spacecraft, and one of the things that they were very careful about when they did that study was that they did not they tried to not use any assumptions based on what we know about life on Earth. They tried to like just follow the instruments, follow what shows up in the instrumentation of the spacecraft. So I think that it is, to some degree, there is a question of, do we even know what to look for? We talked about this a little bit in my other talk. The question of, if we would even know what to be looking for. And I think that definitely, if you're looking at things like biosignatures, I think we mostly know what to look for. I think that biosignatures are plausibly likely to be similar among other species, because they are just things that are sort of out of place relative to nature. But even then, there are some biosignatures where, like, so oxygen is like, that's a stop the presses, right? But like methane, which we know that some of the outer planets have like weird amounts of methane floating around, particularly Titan, which is Saturn's largest moon. We're pretty sure there are chemical ways to get free methane floating around. So it's plausible that you could have something that looks like a biosignature that could also be a chemical process that's not produced by life. And I mean, as I think I will acknowledge, we don't really know how to define life. We still have debates of whether viruses are considered life. But yeah, I think that it is very difficult to necessarily say we know what we're looking for.
Another question from out here. All right, so our next question, building off of that, which would be easier for us to detect, technosignatures or biosignatures?
That's an interesting question. Oh, and one other thing I'll add with that, our radio bubble is bizarre. Like, if any alien civilization that's within, 50, 100 light years is going to look at Earth and say, whoa, there's something weird going on here. And particularly, they're going to notice, if they're continuously monitoring, they're going to be like, wait a minute, 50 years ago, that planet wasn't all bathed in, radio emissions. I think that biosignatures are probably a little easier in the sense that so if you look at Earth, as I just noted, the technosignatures only appear within the last century, but the biosignatures have been here basically, since the dinosaurs, right? So if you're anywhere within a few thousand, or even anywhere in our galaxy, you could potentially see those signatures. No matter how far away you are, it's just a matter of whether you have direct line of sight.
All right. So guys, if you have any questions, like I said, as it gets darker, I become more T-Rex, and my sight is based on motion. So you'll raise your hand and kind of wave it around, and I'll come out for you. So the next online question is, how is a magnetosphere detected? And someone asks, really big magnets?
I'm actually not sure. I actually did not take the time to look into exactly how they were able to I think it's the emissions of the stellar wind that are going into the magnetosphere, because you basically you see sort of the aurora borealis effect of them, of those particles interacting with the magnetosphere.
Right. So the next online question is, when do we expect the message will reach M13?
Oh yeah, M13 says 30,000 years. So, well, 30,000 years minus, I guess it's been going for about 50, so 29,950 years. Give or take 100 or 200 or something.
So it'll get there about the same time, like our sun decides to.
No,
it'll
be well before that. It may be after World War VI, but it'll be well before anything cataclysmic happens to us because of the sun. We might destroy ourselves in the meantime. But
here's a fun comment. So the Arecibo message, someone said, "Great, we sent the aliens a child's finger painting."
Well, I mean, you got to remember they're doing this with computers from the 1970s, so it's actually quite impressive for its time. I think the gentleman in the front here had a question. The young gentleman.
The one hiding?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Do you think that aliens have their own plants?
Plants. That's an interesting question. I feel like that's sort of fundamentally speaks to the nature of our ecosystem, right? Because we have plants fulfill a bunch of niches in the way that life on Earth works, right? Plants, they produce food for us, they produce oxygen. I think that it's likely with carbon-based life, you would need something like a plant, some sort of process that's going to free up the oxygen that they're going to breathe. we've previously, I've had questions about silicon-based life, and obviously the problem with silicon-based life is like if you imagine like the same kind of processes that we have as carbon-based life forms, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Silicon dioxide is sand. So I'm not really sure what sort of process would take silicon dioxide and free up the oxygen again, but I feel like it would probably also like maybe there's a chemical thing that would do that, but it seems likely you would have some kind of plant thing that would do that. So I think it is likely that extraterrestrials would have plants.
All the alien houseplants like we'll never be able to have. Right, so we are coming down to the last few questions online. Were there more questions here? So I am going to put out a last call for questions on the online while we take the few more we have, just because it does take a minute for them to receive messages once I send them, much like when we're communicating with aliens.
Yeah.
Our online audience are our aliens for tonight. So, the next online question is, wouldn't Latin be potentially misleading because we aren't 100% sure of pronunciation since it was did vocally before we started preserving that kind of thing?
That's a great question. I think that's probably true, but I also feel like including Latin is probably a really good choice, like given the fact that it is the like root of so many of the Romance languages. And like as I commented about the South Asian languages, you can see like the similarities between the different the Devanagari or Indo-Aryan languages. I think I don't know if there was a Sanskrit speaker, but it would have been smart to include that, considering Sanskrit is basically the Latin of South Asia.
Sorry, I was getting the attention of some of our parking people because
sounds like there's a party going on.
Yeah, it scared me because I thought something was coming out of the woods at me.
Something was coming out of the woods at you. So I'm always afraid that something's gonna come out of the woods at me up here, and like it would be cool if it was extraterrestrials.
No, the only thing that's come out of the woods there at me has been a very large cricket, some mosquitoes. I wear bug spray.
You never saw the rabbit? The rabbit's come out a few times for me.
The rabbits usually live in the tall grass by the stairs. But anyhow, that's besides the point. The next online question is, would it also have been more useful to have everyone say the same exact thing as like a Rosetta Stone instead of all different things?
That would have been a great idea. I mean, I think that it sort of depends on what you're thinking about the purpose of the message. I think that would have been very useful, but I also think that some of the like this culture just in the way these people are talking, right? Like the kinds of expressions, the way we talk to one another, in Marathi, I know this because my wife, her native language is Marathi. When you answer the phone, the thing you say is bol, which means talk. Like you don't say hello, you don't say hi, how are you? You say talk.
It's an interesting concept. All right, so down to the last couple questions. Anything from over here? All right, so the next one is, wouldn't the paper items in the Voyagers be damaged or degraded beyond what might be useful?
Probably, though that would happen a bit slower than it would on Earth, right? Because there's not a lot of, like a lot of things that damage paper are like moisture or other sort of like a processes that happen because our Earth is very like if you look at the places where we have well preserved like historical documents, they tend to be like the driest places on Earth, like in like the Middle East or in North Africa, like in ancient Egypt and stuff. So I feel like the paper would last a while, especially because it's inside. I remember I looked when Mr. Musk launched his car into space. There was a discussion of like what pieces of the car would survive the longest, and as you would imagine, the aluminum of the frame is going to be there long after like the carbon and the rubber of the tires, and like that's going to just get stripped out by the solar wind. Also, New Horizons is going out into interstellar space, so it's like it's farther away from the sun, which is the thing that's doing most of the damage to stuff here on Earth.
Yeah, probably just thinking about like I believe they said like when you planted the flag on when they planted the flag on the moon, that eventually the radiation's going to completely bleach.
Yeah, it's a white flag now, and also the ascent stage of the lunar module would have probably knocked it over. So it was probably already in the dust, and that now it's probably just a white flag.
All right. And to wrap up the online questions that I have, would it be possible to cover up or negate future bio and techno signatures?
I think that would be very difficult. So part of it is that we can't change the past, right? Like, if we could. There's a. I don't want to spoil too many sci-fi. I think my batteries are dead.
Nope.
Testing.
It's on.
Whoa. Okay, I'm back. I don't want to spoil too many sci-fi novels. I've already done that enough. But there's a discussion of this in the Three Body Problem series by Cixin Liu, where he talks about the idea of like trying to like everybody turn in your cell phones. We don't want any radio signals going out into space that aliens could find. Because you can't change the past, you can't change the biosignatures and technosignatures we already created. I'm really not sure that it's gone again. Yeah, see, it's completely dead.
Okay, turn it off.
Yeah.
Give it to me.
That's
Turn it off.
taking this one now. Okay. Yeah. So since you couldn't really like do anything backward looking, I'm not really sure what sort of scheme you could come up with to mask our bio and techno signatures. I think you could mask a lot of our techno signatures by just, in a certain sense, we're sort of already doing that, because as time has gone on, like if you look at what we were like the radio signals we were sending out into space 100 years ago, we basically had these like giant flamethrower, AM and FM transmissions, mainly AM, that were like blanketing entire continents, right? And now you're mostly, you're driving down the road listening to Spotify, you're on 5G networks, which are very super local, or even LTE, which is much more local. And if you're using satellite radio, then you're listening to signals that are beaming down toward the ground rather than up, right? Or, out. So we're sort of already getting a little quieter in the radio spectrum, but that's doing nothing to negate the massive radars that we're running for weather, air traffic control, and military defense, right? Like the missile command kind of stuff.
All right. So last chance for any questions here. And keep in mind, I am a T-Rex. I can see only movement. All right. So the audience here has been scared into submission. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dan, for another great presentation. Like I said, do check us out on our website, uacnj.org. See what our next talks coming up are, as well as information about all our lovely member clubs, because it is important to join your local astronomy club. They'll give you all the tips that perhaps we here might not be able to give you, because we don't know what sort of light pollution you are under, or chances are some of you have better skies than we do if you live out towards PA. So with that, thank you all and have a good night.